Hi, it's Ann Emery. In this tutorial, I'm going to show you how to analyze an expense log with pivot tables and the SUMIF formula. This is a sort of real, sort of fake data set. I took some of my real business expenses from the past few years. I deleted a bunch of rows. I added a bunch of fake rows. I deleted some of the columns. I was trying to show a spreadsheet that most of us can relate to in our business settings. So I guarantee you that somebody in your office someplace has a log like this where you have a new entry every time you spend money on a certain project. So you can keep track of your budget a little bit more easily. Logs are perfect spreadsheets to use with pivot tables. In fact, pivot tables are going to be about approximately a billion times faster than using the SUMIF or SUMIF formulas for most of you. I can crank out SUMIFs pretty quickly when I'm not trying to do it on camera and explain my steps as I go. But for most people, pivot tables are going to be the right way to approach this data set. But that's why I'm going to show you both options so that you get to weigh the pros and cons of each approach and pick the style that works best for you. Okay, so let's get started. I'm going to walk you through 7 steps I've outlined in this handout, and I'm going to make the handout and the spreadsheet available to purchase online for $5 in case you want to practice the mouse clicks on your own and go through it a little bit more slowly. Step 1 is to organize the spreadsheet. I'm going to show you how to freeze the top few rows, insert filters, resize columns, and wrap text. So the first thing we need to do is, this is a personal preference, but I cannot stand how when I scroll down, I lose the name of each column. I forget what variable goes where, and then I have to try to memorize it. It's just extra brain work. So I'm going to freeze rows 1, 2, 3, and 4 so that even as I scroll, those 4 rows stay stuck there at the top of my sheet. So you figure out which row you want to freeze, so row 4 and up, and then you click 1 below that, so row 5 in this case, just click on the little 5 off to the left. That'll highlight the entire row 5 going across your page. You go up to View, you go to Freeze Panes, you click on the little down arrow, and you select this first option that says Freeze Panes. Then when you scroll down, look, those words stay right there. No more mental energy wasted memorizing what's in each column. Let's insert filters to make it easier to sort and filter our data. So I'm going to click on the row where I want the filters, which is row 4, the one with my variable names. Go to Home, go to the far right, far right, almost all the way to the end of the page. Click the down arrow and select this little button that says Filter with the picture of the sieve on it. You get little boxes on each of your columns, and you can click on any one of those boxes and then sort your data. So dates could be sorted oldest to newest or newest to oldest. You could sort by vendor, the place where I spent the money. You could sort by description. You could sort by expense, smallest to largest or largest to smallest. And you can also filter. So let's say I wanted to look at my spreadsheet for a minute and look at everything except the airfare purchases. I could just uncheck that box, and then airfare purchases are hidden from view. You can kind of see which ones are hidden. If you look at the left, you can see that certain rows are kind of like smushed in really small. They're just kind of hiding from view temporarily. They're not deleted. You can get them back. You just go back up to your little button and you hit select all again, and there, they're back. Sometimes I like to resize my columns. These columns look pretty good right now. I can read just about everything I need to, but sometimes people will send me spreadsheets that look like this, where they're too smashed. I can't even read the amounts. All the numbers turn into dollar signs. So rather than painstakingly stretching out each column one at a time, this won't take too long for this data set. There's 5 columns, but some data sets I work with, one yesterday went into the W's, so went all the way through like regular, and then it was like AA, AB, AC, all the way up to W. So you would not, I don't even know how many hundreds of columns that is. You wouldn't do this times, it would be what, like 26 times, what letter of the alphabet is W? It's a lot. It's too many columns to painstakingly resize by hand. So what I do instead is I highlight all of my columns. You can either click on A over to E to highlight all those columns, or you can just click this little triangle in the upper left that highlights your entire spreadsheet and therefore all of your columns. And with all of your columns selected, you just drag this little gray line between any of the letters, and that will make all of your columns the exact same width. So you could have a bunch of narrow columns, you could have a bunch of like 20-mile wide columns. You kind of just get the look that feels right for your numbers. So you can see enough of the data. You can also double click on this little gray line And then Excel auto fits the columns to fit what's in each column. So column A is super, super wide because this phrase right here was the longest thing that it found in column A. And then it sized column A so that that phrase would be totally in view, wouldn't have to be wrapped or go into the next line. So this one doesn't need to be that long. This is probably fine. And then C probably doesn't need to be that long. C can probably be like this long. And the final thing I do once in a while is I'll wrap some text. So let's pretend that you prefer to have C be really narrow, and then you still want to see what all these descriptions are. You could highlight just column C, go up to the Home tab, go to Wrap Text, and then some of your phrases will automatically bump down into a second or third line so that you can read them all. It's your choice how you choose to organize your spreadsheet, but these are the 4 techniques: freezing the top rows, inserting filters, resizing columns, wrapping the text, that I use over and over and over because they do help me stay organized. Step 2, let's make sure that our pivot table prerequisites are met. Make sure that all of the criteria are met. We can insert a pivot table, no error messages. So there are 2 things we have to do. The first thing is make sure that all of our columns have a label. So make sure you don't insert dates and then not have the word on the top that says date. You have to have some word or phrase at the top of every one of your columns. And the second prerequisite is that you have to make sure you have contiguous cells, that you don't have any totally empty rows or totally empty columns. So make sure you don't have this in your spreadsheet where you've got some random empty column with nothing at all in it, because what Excel does is it starts in this upper left corner and then it hunts all the way to the right until it kind of falls off the end of the earth, hitting a blank column or a blank row, and does the same thing. It hunts downward, trying to figure out where your data set is, and if it hits a totally empty row like this, it stops. And Excel is going to say, hey, this tiny little segment right here, that must be your full data set because we ran into an empty row or column. So no totally empty rows or columns. Okay, step 3, we're going to insert a pivot table. To insert a pivot table, just click on the upper left corner of your spreadsheet. So whatever column is up there, the column label, which is in cell A4 in this case, click on the upper left corner, go up to Insert, and go to this icon that says Pivot Table. You get a pretty jargony pop-up menu. Ignore it. The little green line is just encircling your data set. It said, hey, we went over here until we ran into column F, which was totally empty, so we stopped. We just did A, B, C, D, E, and then we went from row 4 all the way down to row, what are we on, 463, and then we hit an empty row and we stopped. That's good. You just kind of eyeball it and make sure everything looks right, and then hit OK. And your pivot table, which is empty for now, is going to open up in a brand new sheet. You're going to give it a new name. You are not allowed to have sheet 2, sheet 3, sheet 4 in your spreadsheet. You're going to get confused. You're going to forget what you did later on. So right click on the word that says sheet 2, go to rename, and give it a better name. Call it pivot, P-I-V-O-T. And I like to drag my sheets so that they go in the order of my analysis. So I have my data first, and then I insert pivot tables, and then I might insert more tables that are going to go in the appendix of a report later. Then I insert graphs. So it's very logical, very methodical as I go through the process one step at a time. So I'm just holding my mouse down on pivot, just clicking down and dragging this sheet so it comes behind expenses. So what is in this pivot table sheet? Some of you are probably brand new to pivot tables. You're like, what's the big deal? There's nothing there. Okay, I'm going to show you. Pivot tables are pretty cool. So you're going to have this area off to the left with these illustrations. That's where your pivot table is going to appear. That's where Excel is going to do all the calculations, like adding stuff together or multiplying things together for you. So you don't have to grab a calculator. Excel is one big built-in calculator. And then you also need some boxes on the right, which have disappeared temporarily. Don't freak out if you don't see anything on the right-hand side of your screen. All you do is you click on the illustrated part and they come back. So if you click on one of these random cells, they disappear, they come back, they disappear, they come back, and so on. Really, really easy to get them back. Okay, step 4, let's navigate our pivot table even more, figure out what all these boxes are. Okay, so the first part is your field list, or I call it a bank of variables that you have to play with. In our data sheet, we had data for dates, vendors, descriptions, expenses, the category of each expense, and you'll notice that in the field list, it should look familiar. Look, date, vendor description, expense, category. Same exact things. Yours might be really long if you go all the way into the W's like I had to for this one project, but I've purposely picked a pretty easy spreadsheet for today's lesson. So these are the variables you get to drag and drop into these 4 boxes below. So filters, just like we did a minute ago, that's for filtering or sorting your data set. Not sorting, just filtering. Rows, if you drag a variable there, that's what's going to be listed down the side of your table, and then each of those things is going to get its own row. Columns will be listed across the top, and then each of those things gets its own column. And then values, that's kind of the most important. That's what you're going to add up. So if you're looking at an expense log like we are today, we want to add up expenses. So I'm going to take this variable, this column of data, expenses, the one that has the actual dollar amounts, and drag it into values. Just plop it right down. And in my fictional scenario, I spent $17,052.0535. This look isn't very helpful to me. I like to change dollars into, I prefer currency. Some people like accounting. Usually actual accountants like accounting. Accounting formats put parentheses around negative numbers. I like to use currency. It just puts a minus sign at the front and then the dollar signs right next to the numbers. Whichever way you prefer, you probably don't need to be looking at pennies. So I just decrease the decimals on these. Okay, that's the view that I like to see. What else can we drag and drop? We can drag any of these variables into rows or columns or filters, or put 2 variables in rows, or put 2 variables in columns, or I guess you could put 2 variables in filters. I haven't done that in real life before, but you could. Step 5, let's go through this in even more detail again. We're going to run some simple frequencies. We're going to see how much of each thing happened in each column. It's easier than it sounds. You just go through your pivot table 1 column at a time. So I'm going to start with date, the first one, and I drag date into rows. Newer versions of Excel do this really cool thing where it took my exact dates, like August 17th, 2016, or September 24th, 2014. And it automatically groups them into years and into quarters, and within quarters into months. This is a really helpful view. This is how most businesses that I work with when I'm doing workshops and coaching and consulting, this is how they like to look at their expenses. And they like to see, are they spending, more or less money over time? If you have an older version of Excel, don't despair. You can also get months and years. I'm just going to insert some new variables over here and show you how that works. So you would have to go back to your raw data set and recode or recreate some of these variables. I'm going to insert 3 blank columns. So first let me find the year. So out of this specific date, I'm going to parse it into just the year 2015. So I use the year formula, equals year. Open my parentheses, select this cell that I need to transform, close the parentheses, press enter. You might get kind of a wonky looking result at first. Excel gets confused between years and numbers. So you just change this funny, weird result. It should be 2015. You just go to format, click the down arrow, and you need a number. Not a number with decimal places, just a regular old number. And then you double click on this cell in the lower right corner where you see the green square. Just double click on that green square and you can see the years for all the different entries. Sometimes I also like to find month. So I can look at, January 2015 expenses compared to February 15 expenses compared to March. So I'm going to insert equals month. Select my full date that's over in column A, close my parentheses, press the enter key on my keyboard. I also get a funny result, no big deal. Change that into a number and decrease the decimals. So it's grabbing the 6th, the June 6th part from that date. Double click on that little green square and I'll find all the months. And the most useful view for me when I'm tracking business expenses is to do year-month. So I could do equals this thing and this thing, year and month. You can also use the concatenate formula to join two cells together, kind of join those letters and numbers together into one. I like to use and the ampersand simply because it's faster to type out than typing out concatenate. That's too long. So B5 and C5. The result is there. It's just a little smushed together. So I'm going to add one more thing. I'm going to add a dash, year dash month. So I've got B5 and a dash, and I have to put the dash in quotation marks because I'm selecting things like characters off my keyboard, letters or numbers off my keyboard. I'm not selecting a cell reference. I need one more ampersand. So it's this part of the formula and this part of the formula and this part of the formula. Press enter, 2015-6. Click on that cell again, double click on the little green square, and it fills in all the way down. These variables are not going to automatically show up on my next sheet, my pivot table sheet. Go over to pivot and you have to go under analyze. You have to click the refresh button, which refreshes the linkage between your raw data set sheet, whatever that word is, the data, and the pivot table. Okay, so I click refresh. It looks like a little recycling symbol here. And now those new variables, year, month, and year dash month show up. So this is the slightly longer way, but also correct way, especially if you've got an older version of Excel, you wouldn't have quarters and years show up. So to go methodically through your data set, you could analyze first expenses by year, or you could just analyze expenses by month. I don't know how that would be useful, adding all your January expenses together, but then it's across 3 years. You probably wouldn't do that. And then year dash month for me, that's the one I do find most useful. So my first entry was in October 2014. I spent that much in this fictional scenario. My last entry was 2016-9, September 2016. I spent this much. Okay, so you just keep on going through your spreadsheet and you drag one variable at a time. So we looked at the dates. Then you look at vendor. You just drag vendor into rows. You get a whole list of the different places you spent money and the sum. You can also click on this down arrow and sort these greatest to largest or largest to smallest rather than being alphabetical. Do the same thing with description. I don't know if that's as helpful because every time I bought flash drives, I don't think I always typed in the exact same 10 flash drives. I might have written flash drives later. I don't know. Or maybe I deleted those expenses. I buy a lot of flash drives for like thousands of workshop participants every year. And what is my last category? Is that it? Oh, no, I have category. So uncheck description and then check category. Drag that into rows. This for me is the most useful so I can see kind of where my dollars are going. And in the full version of the spreadsheet, I have another category for that I send to my tax woman at the end of the year. That's like, this is like Anne's categories. And then I have the tax woman's categories that I need for that. Okay, step 6. This is where it gets fun. Cross tabulations or crosstabs. This is where you stack two variables together. So you either place two variables in the rows box, two variables in the columns box, or put one in rows and one in columns. The most useful for me is probably going to be category in rows, and then I'll take year in columns, and I have to populate my table with something, so I'm going to drag the dollar amount expense into values. And I can see how much I spent each year per category, or per category by year, however you want to say it. Sometimes I'll actually add in instant color coding on top of these cells to make it easier for my brain to spot patterns. So I'm highlighting the inner contents of the table, not the totals, like not column E, not row 18. That's going to throw things off. I go up to conditional formatting to do some instant color coding. I might insert data bars. I don't know if those are going to be helpful. Let's see. Let's try it. Here's some data bars, little bar charts that live within each cell. Or I could do a color scale. Since these are negative numbers, I'm going to use the white-green color scale so that the larger expenses are dark and the smallest expenses are lighter. And then I can see, looks like it, where did I spend the most money? So airfare, kind of hotel, mileage, technology, especially in 2014 because I had to buy like printer, phone, laptop things. Okay, so just so you know, these are the two I usually use, data bars or color scales, if I want to take a deeper dive in my pivot table. Right now, we've got one variable in rows and one variable in columns. Let me show you where pivot tables get their name, as you can pivot them back and forth. So I'm just going to swap these quickly. And my table pivoted. So now it's just kind of like rotated on its little corner or on its axis. So I've got time in each row, and then I've got the category across the columns. For me, this isn't as helpful just because I have to scroll way over there, and I like to have time going across the top so that the variable goes left to right. That's the way I'm used to looking at it. But this is also correct. You get the exact same calculations. You can stack these variables together. So you could look, at just 2014, and then you get the little 2014 subtotal. How much did I spend in airfare, ground transportation, hotel, and stuff? And then in just 2015, how much did I spend? Or you can reorder these, put category first, year second. So out of the airfare category, how much did I spend this year, and this year? And then airfare subtotal. And out of ground transportation, how much did I spend this year, and this year, and then ground transportation total. The beautiful thing about pivot tables is you don't really have to know what you're looking for before you get started. You can simply drag and drop until it kind of looks right, and you're like, oh, this is the table I need for this coworker, and then let me see, this is the table that I need for this other coworker, and this is the table, this one, that I need to show to this other person. And you get different varieties of it very, very quickly, really within seconds. So those are pivot tables in a nutshell. The last step 7 out of 7 for this tutorial, is to show you the exact same thing, but with the SUMIF and SUMIFs formula. So pivot tables, really, really fast. You just click on the upper left corner, insert pivot table, drag and drop, you've got your answers. The long way, longer for most of you, is going to be doing the same thing with SUMIF. SUMIF. Okay, let me scroll way to the bottom. How long is a spreadsheet? It's super, super long. So let's find the expenses by year. I'm going to find the dollar amount that I spent each year, and then the percent of the total expenses. So dollar amount by year, let me do equals SUMIF. So this is recreating that pivot table we already have, recreating this one. Oh, it's not letting me click on it because I've got my formula open. That's okay. So I'm trying to get essentially this result that was like this fast to get with the SUMIF. Okay, so equals SUMIF, open parentheses. There are 3 pieces of this formula that we need to complete: range, criteria, and sum range. So the first one is the range of the criteria that I care about. So it's all these years. It's everything in column B except the word year up at the top, comma. The comma jumps us over to the next part of the formula. The criteria that we're looking for, that's the next thing we have to fill in. So you could type in by hand 2014 in quotation marks. I'll show you a shortcut for that in a minute. And comma will take you to the third section of your formula. That's the sum range. What do you actually want to add up? Like this expense plus this expense plus this expense. That is in column G. So I have to select all of column G except not the word expense up at the top. Close your parentheses, press enter, and we get $4,367. Currency, and I'm going to right align these. I always right align my numbers and percentages. 4367, which is the same thing here, 4367. Now I've seen some people, then they'll go to the next cell and they're like, okay, equals SUMIF, and they start typing again. Don't do that. That's a huge waste of time. I'm going to show you the shortcut here. So we're going to take this formula and I'm going to drag it down. I'm going to show you what happens. We're going to get an error, kind of. You're not going to know it's an error. It might not look like a mistake, but it will be. So if I drag this down and it looks like the formula kind of drags itself, like it fills in, but it's wrong. And I know it's wrong because I can click on either one of these that I just auto-filled. I go up to the formula bar to investigate, and it's not pulling from the correct range or the correct contents. So I care about, like, all the years are in column B, but it's B 5 through B463. As I dragged my formula down one more row, everything that was referenced within my formula also went down one row. So what it's doing is it's accidentally ignoring the thing in the very first entry of the table. It's ignoring row 5 in this calculation. So it's actually missing $760. That was a big expense. And also it's still only hunting for 2014 entries. So you'd have to manually change this to 2015. And even then we're like still missing the top. So this isn't any good. That's too time consuming. I'm going to delete these and start over a little bit. So I usually just set my upper left-hand corner of my table to be correct. I get everything correct in that cookie cutter cell, and then I create copies of that. Here's what I mean. So I'm going to enter some dollar signs to hold some of my rows constant. So if I know that I want the year to only be pulled out of row 5 through 463, I'm going to enter dollar signs before the 5 and before the 463. It'll hold that steady in place. I'm going to do the same thing over with G because my expenses are only in 5 through 463. You could also insert dollar signs before the G or before the B. It's fine, but I'm not going to drag my formula right to left, so that doesn't really matter. And the next thing I'm going to do, instead of manually typing in 2014 with quotation marks around it, I'm going to tell Excel to hunt for anything that matches this criteria. And as long as you don't have any typos here and you've spelled everything exactly the same, you've typed it out, exactly the same, it's going to work just fine. Okay, press enter. I get the same result at first, 4367. Drag this down, click on one of these cells, go up to the formula bar, click up here, investigate. So it looks good so far. It stops at 463. It's hunting for 2015 numbers. Let's go up to the top. Just eyeball that for a second, and this is perfect. Even though I dragged my formula down 1 in that table, the references are the same. It's still like looking for 2015 entries and it's adding up all those entries. You can see how this is a lot more time consuming if you're not in Excel every single day like I am. It takes some time to learn this. That's why pivot tables, I think, are going to save you a ton of time. I'm going to add these up, just sum. Get the total amount, and it's a good practice to get into finding percentages of a lot of your calculations. So it's that numerator divided by that denominator, and the denominator always comes out of row 467, so I insert a dollar sign there as well. That doesn't look right. Oh, that looks right. Okay, 26. Perfect. Phew, okay. One down, a few more to go. Let me do the same thing with expenses by month, and you can watch the tutorial, again, so you can see SUMIF a second time, and hopefully it'll feel a little bit more natural this time. Okay, equals SUMIF, and I want to find expenses by year and month, and that data is in column D. So I need to go into column D. I'm going to put dollar signs before the 5, before the 463. And what am I hunting for in column D? I'm hunting for anything that is over here. Anything that is right here, 2014-5 entries. And then what do I do when I find anything that says 2014-5? Well, I want Excel to kind of hop over a couple cells to the right and add up all of those corresponding expenses. Add a dollar sign before the 5 and before the 463. Put a closing parentheses at the end of this whole grouping. Press enter and change this into currency. Get rid of the decimal places. Double click. I'm going to recalculate my total. It should be in the 17 sum range, 17052. I'm going to find percentages equals the numerator divided by this cell, that's the denominator. Enter a dollar sign before the 504 because the denominator always lives in that row. It doesn't jump around. That is a tiny little percentage. Oh, maybe I need to add a decimal here. Perfect. And that should add to 100%. Okay, let me do one more so you can really feel confident in this. So I want the dollar total and the percent equals SUMIF. I want to sum by category. So where do the categories live? They live in column H. $sign before the 5, $sign before the 463 so that it doesn't nudge up or down, comma, go select the cells that have the categories typed out in them. So I want to hunt for the word airfare in that column, comma, and what do I want to add up? What do I actually want to sum by is this column, column G. Put a $sign before the 5, put a $sign before the 463, oops, not before the 63, before the 463, and add a parentheses to the end. Press the Enter key. Hopefully you're getting the rhythm of things now. Get a funny looking result, change that into a dollar look and feel like a currency. That's my preference. Get rid of the pennies. I'm going to right align all this. Fill it down, find the total with equals sum, and find the percentages that I spent in each category. It's probably a lot for airfare. What is it going to be the most of? Yeah, airfare, mileage, technology, this numerator divided by this total or denominator. You can also press the F4 key on your keyboard. That cycles through all of the options. So I'm just pressing F4 kind of over and over. And check out the formula bar right here. It's just cycling through where you might want to put the dollar signs. I didn't do that before because I wanted you to get in the swing of like manually doing it a little bit. Okay. So that's SUMIF. I'll show you one more and then we'll close out this video. I knew it was going to be close to 30 minutes, but I really wanted to go in depth on this one. Okay, so let me find by category and by year. Recreating that same, like the cool pivot table, my favorite pivot table here, the one that looked like this. This is the pivot. I mean, man, it's not even a competition to see which one's faster. Okay, so this is what I'm going to recreate with some ifs, not some ifs, some ifs. So I'm going to type in equals some ifs because I've got more than one criteria. I'm looking at, if the row is this certain category and if the row happened in this certain year. So like only expenses that meet both of those criteria. So if this and if this, ifs, plural. Some ifs is in a different order than some if. So a good rule of thumb is just to always use some ifs because you might have to add more criteria into your formula later. It's in a different order, meaning you have to select the sum range, the expenses, column G first, where when we did this one, it was at the end. Okay, so it's like different order. Does that make sense? Okay, hopefully it does. So just always use some ifs really, and you're gonna be in good shape because a lot of time a sum if turns into a sum ifs. Okay, so equals some ifs. I have to select my expenses first, so column G, and put dollar signs before the numbers to hold those rows in place, comma, and what do I need next? I need the criteria range. Okay, so the first criteria I'm looking for is year. So I want things that are this certain year. And which row or which year do I need? I want anything that says this. And my year, they always are listed in row 522 across my screen. So I'm going to put a dollar sign before the 522, comma. My second criteria range is category. Where is the range or the column with all the categories? It is column H. Some dollar signs before those numbers, comma, which categories do I want? Oh, I'm going to show you how to do this formula wrong and then the right version. and then this column. Now in the past, whenever I selected this column, I hadn't been using any dollar signs. So I'm going to show you what happens. So we get the correct result first, 796.2. Let's see if it's correct. 796.2. Okay, so good so far. Let's change this into a currency with no decimals, and we'll right align that. When you drag this formula down, it still works. So 796, 60, 439, 796, 60, 439. But when you drag it across, it's going to get messed up. I'll show you what happens. Okay, so I can drag this whole column to the right, and I'm probably going to get an error message. Let's see what happens. Yeah, it doesn't work. It's all zeros, because anytime something looks fishy, just go up to your formula bar and see where the data is pulling from. So I want Excel to hunt for 2015 entries, but then instead of hunting for airfare entries, instead of hunting for like the word airfare or the phrase ground transportation, it's looking for things that say in the category column, is looking for things that say 796. 796 is not a category. So again, just delete all these. Delete those, and actually delete all these too. Go back up to the upper left corner, the anchor cell, and all I'm doing is in the very last piece of my formula, the one where this criteria is listed, the pinkish, kind of purplish color, I'm going to insert a dollar sign before the A to hold that column constant. So all of my categories are always in column A, right here. So even as I drag my formula to the right in my table, I want column A to stay stuck right there. Okay, press enter, drag down, drag across, and then, oh no, did I not do it right? Did I drag the wrong? What did I do? Oh, I think I got my columns messed up. I need this. It looks right. What did I mess up? Oh, I have to hold my column. Okay, well, I'm glad I showed you this then, because I know what I did. I have to enter more dollar signs than I thought. Okay, so I'll show you slower what I did wrong too. So you know how I'm hunting for a year? I care about 2014 like year entries, or 2015 entries, or 2016. I held those rows constant. So I said, hey, Excel, go look in row 5 to like 4 something, 460 something, or 490 something, whatever the number was. And then as I dragged my formula to the right, it also nudged over the year, and it nudged it over to the to column C. And then my categories, oh, and then expenses. Okay, I need a lot more dollar signs than I remembered. I was trying to be a minimalist with my dollar sign approach, and I ended up doing myself more harm than good, but that's okay. That's why I'm doing this live from my office and not rehearsed, because I want you to see my thought process too. Okay, I just need to go back here, and I'm going to enter a ton of dollar signs. So I only want to sum things that are in G5 through G463. So I've got dollar signs before the letters and before the numbers. My criteria range for the years only live in column B. I don't want that to nudge over and go look for years in column C. Column C is something else. It's like year dash month in column C. The years are good. Those live in row 522, but I'm not freezing the letters, because I want the letters to move to the side. And what is this one? Oh, that's category. Category only lives in H. So I have to put dollar signs before the H as well. And then this one's good. Okay, this should work. Third time's a charm. Cross your fingers. We're going to get the same results in this column, and we should get actual data in the other columns. Phew, okay. 1683, 350, 1034, etc., etc., etc. Those are right. Sometimes, especially if you're new, I learned this from a colleague, you can use your sorting and filtering buttons to check some of these. So let me look for just 2014 entries, and let me look at, let's say, just airfare expenses. And those expenses were, I just highlight these and I look at my little quickie sum. That was 796.2, which is the same result we got in the table, I remember, and also the same result here. So you can kind of spot check a few of your entries and just make sure things add up, make sure your formulas are right. Long story short, with any type of log, especially an expense log, you are definitely going to want to use pivot tables, I think, over formulas, because they tend to be more error proof. You can see even me who does this like all the time, I'm in Excel all day long doing calculations and doing graphs, I still make typos in my formulas pretty frequently. So pivot tables are going to be a lot faster, less prone to errors. You don't even know what you have to like look for. You get to just explore them and follow your curiosities and drag and drop your variables into different rows. Okay, so thanks so much. If you want to practice this on your own, you can download the handout with step-by-step instructions. You can watch the video a billion times. You can download the completed spreadsheet too and hunt around in my formulas on your own. All right, thank you. Bye.